Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 14th of March. So coming to the first article, the French connections. Now the context here is with regards to the India-France bilateral relation. This is important because the International Solar Alliance Summit is what is being held in New Delhi and it is being chaired by both India and France. So as a result of which the bilateral relation between these two countries becomes important. Now coming to the issues which have been discussed. The first issue is with regards to the areas of bilateral cooperation. Now, what you need to understand here is that this is largely a bird's eye view of all the plethora of areas where India and France are cooperating. First and foremost is the civil nuclear agreements, also on defense, space, counterterrorism, education, research and development in science and technology, culture, urban development, climate change, trade, economics, people-to-people contacts, intelligence sharing, technology sharing. So this is something that you should know, that there is a huge scope of engagement between India as well as France. So that is something that has been given in the editorial. Another important analysis is with regards to the history of relations between India and France. Now the history of relations between these two countries in the modern times can be related in the aftermath of the Cold War. Now, in the aftermath of the Cold War, both India as well as France had a similar opinion. They voiced collectively for a global multipolarity. France itself was wary of rise of US as a single power, and it even went ahead to calling US a hyperpower. So in that context, both India and France had similar opinions since that point of time. So that is something that is important. Another analysis in the history is with regards to the defense cooperation. This is something that can be dated back to the 1950s itself. Also, there has been space cooperation since 1960s. Also, France has helped India in setting up the Sriharikota launch site. So that is something that you should know. Another analysis in the historical aspect is the 1998 Strategic Partnership Agreement, which was signed between India. Another thing that becomes important here is that in the year 1998 only, India had conducted its nuclear tests, and amongst all the major countries, France was the first country to open negotiations with India after India's nuclear tests. You should know that after these tests, India had faced global sanctions and global criticism, but France was one country that understood the sensitivities of India. It understood that India is surrounded by nuclear powers both in its west as well as in its east, and as a result of which India's demand for nuclear energy or nuclear prowess was something that was important. It was sensitive to India. Another thing which is important is that amongst all the P5 countries in the United Nations, France was the first country which called for making India a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. So that is another important aspect with regards to the history of relations. Now, in the present times, both the countries are cooperating with regards to space technology. Both countries are planning to send joint missions for space situational awareness. High-resolution Earth observation missions is something that both the countries are focusing on. This is going to have application in meteorology, oceanography, cartography. So those are areas of engagement with regards to space technology. Another very important area for engagement now is terrorism. You should note that in the recent past, France has experienced a lot of terror attacks, especially by the Islamic State. So this makes something important because India and France can now cooperate on terrorism, especially with regards to cyber security. And one important other area for cooperation is with regards to radicalization. France is facing this problem of radicalization, and this is something that even India is experiencing. So on that front also both the countries can engage. So that is one analysis which has been given. Another analysis is towards marking a shift from a government to government model towards a business to business model and a people to people model. Now, at present, largely the engagement is between the governments, and business to business engagement is less, and also people to people engagement is less. You should know that the trade between India and France is only $10 billion. Compared to, and this is half compared to the trade between India and Germany. So there is huge scope for increasing economic trade. So that is something that is what has been analyzed in the editorial. Another thing now which becomes important in the relation is the International Solar Alliance. This has opened up a new area for cooperation between these two countries, which is solar energy as well as renewable energy. So that is something that is important. Another thing which is important in the bilateral relationship is the smart city project. Now you should know that India has a lot to learn from France in this regard. France is known for its urban planning. It is known for management of services like housing, transport, water, sanitation, etc. Another thing which is important is that France has successfully used the PPP model for smart city projects, and this is something that India should engage with France on. And also you should know that 3 cities is what France is focusing on. These 3 cities are Chandigarh, Puducherry and Nagpur. So these are the 3 cities which France has been focusing on, especially for developing them into smart cities. So that is something that is important. Another very important analysis which has been given in the editorial is with regards to maritime cooperation. Now you should know that both India and France have signed a vision document on the Indian Ocean. Now many of you might wonder that why is France interested in the Indian Ocean? But the issue here is that France has a number of overseas territories both in Indian Ocean as well as in the Pacific Ocean. And also, because of these overseas territories, France has the second largest exclusive economic zone in the world. So that is one important analysis. Also, recently, France has opened its bases in Reunion Islands, Djibouti Islands, and in Abu Dhabi. So from that context, a partnership between India and France over the Indian Ocean is something that is going to be important. One more analysis is what has been given. Now you should know that India is also engaging with the US with regards to cooperating in the Indian Ocean. But the issue is that between India and US, the cooperation is largely to the East Indian Ocean. This is primarily because the Central Command of US has good relation with Pakistan, and as a result of which the western part of the Indian Ocean gets ignored. So it is this vacuum which France can plug, and India can engage more effectively with France vis-a-vis the Indian Ocean. So that is something that has been analyzed here. Another thing which is important is with regards to the Brexit. Now here you need to know that primarily Indian businesses looked at UK as an entry point to the entire Europe. But now with the imminent Brexit, France can fill this gap and it can become France which can be the gateway to the rest of the Europe. So that is something that is being explored. Another analysis which has been given is with regards to the education sector. You should know that at present approximately only 2,500 students from India are migrating to France to study for their higher education. This when compared to China is very less, because China is sending 250,000 students yearly. So there is a scope to increase the number of students. Another important development what has happened is that both the countries have signed an agreement on mutual recognition of academic degrees and also on a knowledge summit. So this is a major development which has taken place now. So that is something that is important. Another analysis is with regards to the tourism sector. First and foremost is that both India and France should increase tourism towards each other. So that is one analysis of tourism. Another important analysis is that France has a tourism potential of 80 million tourists landing in France every year. And compared to India, India has only 9 million tourists. Now compare the size of both these countries. So India has huge potential for tourism. And in this regard, India can follow the French model and it can learn a lot from France on developing the tourism industry. So that is one important area of cooperation which can develop. So that is something that is important here. India-France relation is going to be important for General Studies paper 2. So that is the relevance. Now coming to the next article, an urgent prescription. This is an important article. This is an important issue. The context here is with regards to the need to shore up the public sector capacity for making medicines in India. At present, India is known as the pharmacy of the world. This is largely because the private pharma sector in India is very powerful. It has shown its capacity to produce branded and unbranded generic drugs. But what is happening is that largely this has left behind the public sector in manufacturing medicines, and that is what is a cause of concern. One more analysis is something that you should know, that why is it that India is known as the pharmacy of the world? Why is it that the private pharma sector in India has developed so much? This is primarily because of the patent laws in India. In the year 1970, India came up with a patent law where focus was on process patent rather than product patent. This was only changed in the year 2005 when finally India adopted the global practice of product patent over process patent. So this time period that was there between 1970 to 2005, this time period provided ample opportunity for the pharma industry in India to grow and assume the status that it has today. So that is something that is important here. Another thing is that why is it that the public sector should participate in manufacturing of medicine? What is the importance of this public sector? The importance is for manufacturing of essential drugs and vaccines, so that the people in India should not be left vulnerable vis-a-vis the drugs that private sector cannot manufacture, or it is going to manufacture at a low cost. So to just do away with this vulnerability of the citizens, public sector should also make its presence difference in this particular sector. So that is something that is important. Another analysis is with regards to the idea of compulsory licensing. This is something that is important. First and foremost, you need to understand that what is compulsory licensing. Compulsory licensing in simplest form is a process of granting a right to a particular company to use a patent to someone other than the patent holder. For example, this company A is manufacturing a drug D for which it has a patent. But if the government gives a compulsory license to this particular drug, then this drug can be manufactured by some other particular company which does not have the patent, but it can be allowed to manufacture the same drug D. So this is what is going to constitute compulsory licensing. Now this is largely a practice that is used with some degree of restraint, and the idea behind this is to ensure that there are cheap essential medicines that are available, especially in the interest of public health. Another thing that is important here is that sometimes this is also used to break cartels and monopolies, which often form in order to even abuse the rights of the patients. Often it happens that these patent holders, they have a tendency of evergreening their patents, they form monopolies, and because of that, a large number of patients are exploited, and as a result of which, this compulsory license is a safeguard to this. So that is something that is important. And compulsory licensing is much more important for a country like India, primarily because India does not have much of innovation. So it is not benefiting from patents, rather it is being subject to the adversities of patents more than the benefits. So that is something that is important vis-a-vis the analysis on compulsory licensing. Also, you should know that this is accepted under WTO, and in the year 2012, India came up with its first ever compulsory licensing of the drug Nexavar. This was an anti-cancer drug. So in that context, you should know that compulsory licensing is something that India warrants and India much is in need of. But the issue here is that even if Indian government is going to provide compulsory licensing, private sector is going to be unwilling to produce these medicines. Now, this is primarily because of the major cause for this is that often a compulsory licensing is followed by a lot of litigation. Even in the case of Nexavar, this was a decision which was taken by the Supreme Court. So you should know that to avoid this litigation, private sector often does not wish to manufacture drugs which have been compulsorily licensed also. So for ensuring the benefits of compulsory licensing, also it is warranted that public sector should be strengthened. So that is something that becomes important here. Another analysis is with regards to the commercially unattractive drugs. Now there are some drugs which have become commercially unattractive for the private sector. For example, the multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, also anti-cancer drugs, and also some drugs for tropical diseases. Now, for example, the multi-drug resistant tuberculosis is a very small section of population, and especially this is largely a problem in India itself. So the private sector is not very much incentivized to produce or manufacture these drugs, and that is one cause of concern. So for such kind of unattractive drugs, it is important that the public sector fills the plug here and it starts manufacturing these drugs. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another analysis which is important is with regards to the strategic alliances. Now, what you need to understand here is that often in the private companies in the pharma sector, stakes are being purchased by foreign companies. And as a result of which, a strategic alliance is what is being formed between the foreign pharma sector and Indian pharma sector. And this is making Indian pharma sector not very independent. It is making it bound by foreign compulsions. So to counter these compulsions, also it becomes important that the public sector should be strengthened. So that is one analysis. Another thing that you need to know is here is with regards to the active pharmaceutical ingredients, which are known as the APIs for short. Now, this is the key ingredient in any drug, and at present for the APIs, India is dependent on China, from whom India is importing these APIs. So this makes India vulnerable. It is a matter of national security as India's relations with China are down spiraling. So in that context, the patients and the people in India become very much vulnerable to costs and also the availability of APIs. So in this context, also what is being advocated is that India should manufacture its own APIs, and this can happen through the public sector, which should be given a push. So that is one analysis. Another important issue is with regards to the high-level expert group. Now, this was an expert group that was formed in the year 2011, and it advised the government on universal health coverage. Now, this expert group had also called for establishing public sector undertakings for the manufacture of essential medicines. So that is again one important analysis here, that this is something that has been advised even by this expert group. Another thing which is very important here is the Ayushman Bharat program, which has been introduced in the current budget. Now, this is going to be the biggest health insurance program in the entire world. So for making this program successful, what is required is that for universal health coverage in the long run, first and foremost, patients should have universal access to affordable drugs. And these two aspects are what are linked. And it is in the interest of this program that a public sector development with regards in the sector of pharma or the public sector companies for manufacturing essential drugs should come into being. So that is something that is important vis-a-vis the analysis of this editorial. Now the importance will be first and foremost in the health sector, where you can give this example. Another importance will be in the importance of public sector undertakings, which are a part of the general studies paper 2. You might have an opportunity to explain that why are public sector undertakings still important in India in this era of liberalization, privatization and globalization. Why is it that PSUs hold importance? So there you can give this example that how PSUs continue to hold some relevance. So that is going to be the utility of this particular editorial. Now coming to the next article, a model protest. Now the context here is with regards to a 6-day march of nearly 200 kilometers by thousands of farmers who have marched from Nasik to Mumbai to sensitize the government about their problems. Now, the importance of this issue is going to be in the ethics paper. This is primarily because of the manner of the conduct of these farmers. Now, here you need to know that this has become a model protest because this was a protest which took place without disrupting the lives of the citizens. And also these farmers have refrained from aggressive sloganeering. It has been a very peaceful protest. Compared to an era where we are seeing such disruptive protests, for example, the Jat protest or for some other protests, example, the Patidars and the Patel protests. So these are some examples of how ruckus the society is becoming. So it often develops a sense of pessimism in the society. But when in such a scenario, such kind of a march is what has taken place, which was so peaceful. And also this was a march that was taken place by farmers who are not very educated. So the importance here becomes in ethics. Education is not going to inculcate ethics. Ethics is something that is inherent. So there again, this march, this example of this peaceful march is going to be important. So that is going to be the relevance here. Another thing is with regards to joining urban Indians with farmers. Now the march has been from Nasik to Mumbai, and it is being said that a large number of citizens in Mumbai cooperated with these farmers. These citizens have provided these farmers with food, water, shelter and footwear. So this was a means by which the rural India as well as urban India got joined. There again this example will become important. Another thing you should know is what is the government's response. Now the government has been extremely sensitive to farmers because of the manner of their protests. The government has said, the Chief Minister of Maharashtra has said that he is deeply humbled by the farmers' approach, and most of the demands of these farmers is something that the government has accepted. Often these protests, which are violent protests, they justify themselves by saying that they are not being heard. So in that case, this example becomes important, that how a peaceful and a silent protest could also elicit such a positive response. So that is going to be one importance. Another thing is with regards to the loan waivers. Now here you need to understand that in this particular case, the government has been unwilling to ensure a loan waiver to these farmers, and that is a good step. This is primarily because the loan waivers largely benefit only big farmers, and small farmers are avoided because small farmers have hardly taken any loan from the banks. So that is why loan waivers is not very much in the interest of small farmers. And another thing is that giving frequent loan waivers often impacts the structural reforms in agriculture, which is what is warranted for doing away with agricultural distress. So that is one analysis here. You should link this movement of farmers with the issue of agricultural distress also. So that is going to be important. Another thing which has been highlighted in the editorial is this shrinking of farm sector in India. Indeed, this is a cause of concern. For that matter, entire agricultural distress is what is going to be important here. One more area where you can use this particular example is a question, if ever is asked, on Gandhiji. Now, you should know that it is being said that Gandhian values have somehow been lost and they have been eroded from the society. But this example is a stark example that how Gandhiji still lives in India. This is a peaceful protest. This reminds us of the Dandi March of Gandhiji. This was a non-violent protest, and still it has got maximum benefit from the government. So in that context, you can say that Gandhian values are not dead, rather they still exist and they are still functional in India. So that is going to be one more utility of this editorial. Now coming to the next article, Fire in the Woods. The context here is with regards to the forest fire in Tamil Nadu's Theni hills, which has claimed the lives of 11 trekkers. Now, the issues that are important are, first and foremost, it is a failure of the forest department. Now, it is a failure of the forest department primarily because this was the fire season, and in that respect, the forest department should have been proactive, and it should have stopped this trek from happening altogether. So that is one criticism against the forest department. Another thing is that the safety concerns in adventure events is something that is time and again being ignored. This is a pan-India phenomenon, and as a result of which regulations by the administration and administrative lapses is something that needs to be curbed more so at the state level. So that is something that is important here. Another thing that you need to know is that there is a rise of natural tourism in India. Now, with increasing urbanization and increasing incomes of people, citizens are going to be seeking to go back to nature for relaxation and stress, relieving themselves of their stress. So in that scenario, natural tourism is definitely on a rise. But what is important is that with regards to rising natural tourism, the government also increases safeguards in these areas, and that is something that is going to be important. You should know that few years back there was an accident in the Beas river also, where a number of students from Hyderabad were drowned in the river. Now, what is important here is that you cannot blame the people who are going to do such escapes like forests and for that matter rivers for behaving in an irresponsible manner. Rather, it is the state which should ensure that safeguards are what are maintained. Some training is what is given to the teams who are organizing such kind of tours. So that is something that has been analyzed here. Another thing which is important is with regards to the forest's vulnerability. What is important here is some data which has been issued by the ISRO. According to ISRO, 55% of forests in India are vulnerable to forest fire. So in that case, again, what becomes important is that the state should be prepared for such kind of accidents. So that is something that is important. Another thing is with regards to a warning system. Now, a warning by ISRO should have been given to the forest department, and the forest department should have given alerts to these groups and to our organization, and for that matter to the general public at large, that it is dangerous to go into the forest in this particular time where forest fires are on a rise. So that is something that where a lapse is what has happened. So that is something that has been highlighted. Another thing, as again, is the safety standards in tourism. Now, you might get an opportunity to discuss tourism in India, tourism potential in India. So wherever you get that opportunity, you should also bring about the idea of safety standards which need to be maintained in tourism. So that is again going to be the one importance of this particular issue. So that is the relevance. Now, based on today's discussion, please try and attempt these questions within a word limit of 150 words. And with this, we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow.